The Ordnance quick-fire 17-pounder, one of the best armor-piercing guns of World War II. The gun could penetrate more armor than the famous German 88. The British used this anti-tank gun from 1943 into the Korean War. This gun was used as an anti-tank gun on its own carriage and mounted to a number of powerful British armored vehicles and tanks, like the Achilles, an upgunned M10 tank destroyer. Then there was the cruiser tank Challenger, the self-propelled anti-tank gun known as the Archer, of course the famous Sherman Firefly, and the post-war Centurion tank, which was briefly armed with a 17-pounder, until this was replaced in 1949 by a 20-pounder, as shown equipped here. The development of the 17-pounder began in 1940 as it was rapidly discovered World War II was going to be a war involving significant tanks and armor, the likes of which were only going to grow in size and capability. The British were wise to develop this gun. When the Tiger I appeared in late 1942 in North Africa, the tank outclassed everything the British had in the field. The Germans were also at this time making short work of British armor at range with their 88 flak anti-aircraft and anti-tank guns. 100 prototype 17-pounder anti-tank guns were rushed to North Africa in direct response to the Tiger I threat. These first guns were given the code name Pheasant. They entered combat even before dedicated carriages were built and were mounted on 25-pounder gun howitzer carriages. By the time the Allies landed in Italy in September of 1943, the 17-pounders were fully developed with dedicated carriages and were being mounted to armored vehicles. They were a clear success. The 17-pounder can penetrate about 230 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, firing armor-piercing sabot rounds with a tungsten core. This meant that anything armed with the 17-pounder had the potential to knock out the biggest of German armor. The 17-pounder fired a round of the same 3-inch or 76.2 millimeter caliber as the American 76 millimeter gun found on American tanks like the M18 Hellcat and the famous Easy 8 Sherman. However, the 17-pounder was more powerful. It had a longer 4.2 meter barrel. The longer barrel allows propellant to effectively push around for longer down the barrel, transferring more energy to the projectile as it's fired from the gun. The 17-pounder further had a larger cartridge case, using about 2.5 kilograms more propellant. The biggest problem for the 17-pounder was that it was too large to be conventionally fitted inside most tanks. The Sherman Firefly, for example, required significant modifications to both the gun and turret. The recoil system of the gun had to be redesigned, and the gun breech was rotated 90 degrees to allow loading from the left side rather than from the top. As the turret became cramped by the gun, it was extended by means of a box at the rear to allow room for the radio. The Challenger had a turret designed specifically around the 17-pounder. The Challenger was built on the Cromwell's tank chassis, but due to the extra weight of the turret, it needed some adjustments to the hull and tracks. Armor further had to be reduced. It's essentially a quick, glass cannon. It could take out any tank it came across, but also be destroyed by most guns. Ultimately, building the Challenger was more complicated than producing Sherman Fireflies. Only 200 were built in 1944 and 1945. The Comet, with its modified 17-pounder, the new 77mm HV, or high-velocity gun, made the Challenger obsolete. The Archer had a more successful production run, with 655 built, with production starting in 1943 until the end of the war. This design mounted a 17-pounder on a Valentine infantry tank chassis. Archers fought in northwest Europe and Italy, and post-war served with the Egyptian army. One of the more distinct features of this design is that the gun faces the rear of the chassis instead of the front. This design was rather effective, making the Archer an excellent ambush vehicle. The Archer, with its low silhouette, could lay in wait for an enemy vehicle, fire, then scoot away without having to turn around. Vehicles like the Archer were considered under British military doctrine self-propelled anti-tank guns, and were crewed by 4 men of the Royal Artillery, rather than Royal Armoured Corps. Alright, I'm Johnny, thanks for watching. Sorry if we cruised through this one as quick as a comet. It can be a challenge covering so many vehicles in such a brief video. But do take care and have a nice rest of your day.